The US has long been haunted by headlines. Shootings at night, carjackings, and rising homicide numbers dominating the news. But 2025 arrived with a shock few saw coming. Across dozens of major cities, from New York to Los Angeles, the homicide rate began falling. This wasn't a trick of the data. It wasn't a small dip. Law enforcement, analysts, and community leaders struggled to believe what was happening. The nightmare America had grown accustomed to was suddenly changing course. In cities that braced for more debt, more violence, more grieving families, the bodies never came at the same rate. Places that once posted weekly vigils now reported fewer gun deaths. Newspapers quietly printed fewer crime alerts. The mood shifted. Fear of unchecked violence was replaced by cautious hope. Even skeptics had to ask, is America really getting safer? For decades, crime surges felt cyclical, but this drop felt different. It wasn't tied to just one city or one trend. It spanned coast to coast. Analysts pointed to reports from the Council on Criminal Justice showing homicide reductions of nearly 17% in the first half of the year across 30 major U.S. cities. Federal data backed it. This chapter dives into the raw numbers, federal crime statistics, year-over-year comparisons, and city-level data charts. It's a landscape reset, a possible turning point in the American crime story. But with change comes uncertainty. How long could this last? And what would it take to turn the decline into a lasting trend? The national story of dropped homicides is driven by specific cities. Places that saw some of the highest violence in recent years now reporting some of the biggest declines. Cities like New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and Minneapolis are at the center of what could be a blueprint for safer urban America. In New York, for instance, homicides dropped significantly compared to peak pandemic years, and precincts once plagued with gunfire now reported fewer fatal shootings. Chicago, long battling entrenched gang violence, also saw a notable dip, surprising many local activists and residents. The ripple effect spread to mid-sized cities too. Places like Indianapolis and Kansas City reporting downward trends in fatal violence. Local law enforcement credited the decline to precision policing. Rather than broad sweeps, police focused on repeat, high-harm offenders using data-driven strategies. They used predictive analytics, hotspot policing, and community collaboration to make smarter interventions. Technologies like real-time crime centers, shot detection sensors, and improved license plate tracking helped open cases faster and allocate resources more efficiently. But community-based efforts also deserve the credit. Violence interruption programs, local volunteers, or formerly incarcerated mediators stepped up in neighborhoods long discounted by the system. After-school programs, mental health outreach, and grassroots peacemakers created bridges where violence once seemed inevitable. This chapter examines how these cities became models, not just for law enforcement, but for innovation, trust, and long-term hope. A story of how collective action can reshape the crime narrative. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. What could possibly explain a large, coordinated drop in violence across such varied U.S. cities? Experts point to a mix of social, economic, and technological factors converging in 2025. First, the post-pandemic rebound gave communities more stability. Jobs recovered, schools reopened to full capacity, and youth engagement programs relaunched. For many at-risk neighborhoods, this return to structured life helped reduce the stress and isolation that fueled conflict. The presence of social infrastructure, youth centers, mentorship networks, and mental health services strengthened just when they were needed most. Second, policing evolved. Many cities embraced precision policing, targeting the small percentage of people responsible for a large share of violent crime. Instead of general patrols, law enforcement used data to deploy teams strategically, often working in partnership with community leaders. This wasn't a crackdown, it was surgical and designed to minimize harm while maximizing results. Third, tech became a force multiplier. Gunfire detection systems sent real-time alerts. ShotSpotter technology, combined with cameras and pattern analysis, helped detectives respond faster and more effectively. Data sharing between agencies improved. Digital forensics, tracking cell phone movements, social media activity, and online violence threats became integral. Fourth, community-driven programs grew bigger and stronger. Neighborhood outreach, mediators, violence interrupters, and mental health professionals were being woven into policing efforts. Many cities expanded funding for these teams, making prevention as visible as enforcement. Finally, cultural shifts mattered. More Americans talked about violence prevention openly. Local leaders prioritized safety in budgeting. And policy discussions moved beyond lock 'em up to heal our neighborhoods. Together, these drivers created a new ecosystem for public safety, one where multiple systems work toward reducing violence rather than just reacting to it. Even as homicides declined, many Americans still believed crime was out of control. This chapter explores the dangerous gap between perception and reality. Part of that gap is media. Sensational crimes make headlines. Viral videos of shootings, tragedies, or protests dominate social feeds, amplifying fear. To many viewers, crime feels worse because they see the worst more often, and those stories spread fast. Political rhetoric also plays a role. Crime has become a powerful talking point in elections. Candidates for both parties use worst-case stories to drive fear-based narratives. Yet these soundbites often overshadow data, making it harder for average Americans to trust crime statistics. Another factor? Localized variance. Crime improvements aren't uniform everywhere. A city may show a massive drop overall, but specific neighborhoods may still struggle with gun violence, poverty, or police mistrust. These hot zones can distort public perception, making danger feel closer than it is. There's also a delay in how people internalize change. Old habits die hard. If someone expects to hear gunshots, a year or two of quiet doesn't erase decades of trauma. For some, the memory of violence weighs heavier than the promise of new data. This chapter underscores an important truth. What we see isn't always what's happening. And until fear catches up with reality, public conversation and policy may remain stuck. If 2025 is the year crime turned a corner, can the decline last? This final chapter examines the fragile balance between progress and risk, and the steps that must be taken to solidify the gains. To sustain the drop, many experts argue for permanent investments in community-based violence prevention. It's not enough to rely on temporary programs or pandemic-era funding. Cities must embed interrupters, mediators, mental health professionals, and youth services into their long-term budgets. Violence prevention needs to be institutional, not episodic. Law enforcement must continue doing precision policing. That means using data responsibly. It also means accountability, transparency, and partnerships with community leaders. Trust can't be sacrificed for low crime statistics. Technological innovation should keep advancing, but not at the expense of civil liberties. As gunfire detection, predictive analytics, and digital forensics grow more powerful, policymakers must ensure ethical and equitable use of these tools. Cultural change is perhaps the hardest. The narrative around crime must evolve. From fear to hope, media, political leaders, and community organizations need to celebrate progress, not just crises. And average citizens should feel empowered to talk about violence prevention and to demand that investments continue. Finally, we must stay vigilant. Crime cycles always exist, and there's no guarantee this downturn will last forever. But 2025 offers a rare moment of possibility. If the momentum holds, it could be a turning point, not just in crime rates, but in how America defines public safety. This is more than data. It's a story about transformation. And in that transformation, there's a chance for safer neighborhoods, stronger communities, and a future where violence doesn't define our cities.